That night, Quantico looked like it was under attack from the heavens themselves. Rain smashed against the windows like it had a vendetta, and the thunder sounded like it was having a shouting match with the whole world. Inside the FBI Academy, it was a different kind of storm brewing, one filled with the buzz of folks gearing up for something big. You'd think the flickering lights were trying to set the mood, casting spooky shadows everywhere and making everyone look like they were about to share ghost stories instead of sitting through a lecture. Right in the middle of all this was Professor Jonathan Avery, cool as a cucumber while everyone else was practically vibrating with excitement. The guy had a rep for catching a big bad named Mountain Shadow, so you can bet every seat was filled. This wasn't your usual snooze fest of a lecture. It was the hot ticket of the night, with Avery promising to take us all down into the dark corners of the human mind. Avery had everything laid out just so, like he was about to perform surgery instead of giving a talk. And when he finally started, it was like the storm outside dialed it up a notch, just for effect.
"Tonight,"
he said, voice booming over a thunderclap,
"we're diving headfirst into the abyss. We're talking about psychopaths, folks. Not just the textbook kind, but the real deal."
He paced the room like he owned it, the lights making him look like he was in some dramatic movie. And let me tell you, when he talked about understanding psychopaths, it wasn't in a let's read about it in a book way. He meant getting into the nitty-gritty, kind of stuff that gives you goosebumps.
Imagine the worst monsters you can think of. I often start my lectures with this thought experiment to dive into the chilling world of psychopathy. These individuals are not your typical villains lurking in dark alleys or the monsters under your bed. They are far more terrifying. Psychopaths are among us, blending into society with a dangerous charm and calculated malice. They don't just break the rules. They live in a world where the concept of rules is alien. And empathy, that fundamental human connection that binds us together, is utterly foreign to them. Through the lens of science, we've begun to understand that psychopaths are fundamentally different at a neurological level. Their brains are wired in such a way that the emotional responses we take for granted are muted or entirely absent in them. This disconnection allows them to commit acts that would leave the average person racked with guilt without losing a wink of sleep. It's not merely a moral failing, but a profound and disturbing divergence in the human experience. Consider Ted Bundy, a name that has become synonymous with the lethal charm of psychopathy. Bundy was a master manipulator, using his charisma as a cloak to hide his true monstrous nature. His ability to charm, deceive, and ultimately destroy lives is a stark reminder of the duality of psychopathy, the surface charm and the underlying abyss. One of the most haunting aspects of psychopathy is their perception of others not as fellow human beings, but as objects to be used and discarded at will. This objectification allows them to manipulate and harm without the burden of conscience that would stop most people in their tracks. It's a chilling thought, knowing that such a gaze might fall upon you, calculating your worth only in terms of utility or as an obstacle to be removed. As I address you, the future agents at Quantico, it's crucial to underscore the importance of recognizing and understanding these individuals, not just for the sake of apprehending them, but in anticipation of the broader implications for law enforcement and society. The study of psychopathy isn't just an academic exercise. It's a vital component in the arsenal against crime. It informs strategies for prevention, intervention, and, in some hopeful cases, rehabilitation. Our exploration into the minds of psychopaths is far from over. Each case, each individual we study adds another piece to the puzzle. But the more we learn, the better equipped we are to protect the innocent and prevent future tragedies. As we continue this journey, let us remember the victims and their families, whose lives have been irrevocably changed by these encounters with true evil. They remind us of the stakes involved in our pursuit of justice and understanding. In this exploration, Let us be guided by empathy, the very trait that psychopaths lack, to connect with and support one another in the face of darkness. Let us use our growing knowledge not to stigmatize but to safeguard, to heal, and to bring light where there is shadow. Together, armed with science, empathy, and resolve, we stand on the front lines against the monsters among us, ensuring that their capacity for harm is diminished, one understanding at a time.
He wrapped it up by saying,
This journey into the dark side of the mind is just starting. There's a lot more to learn if we're going to stand a chance against these walking nightmares.
Just when you think it's over, and you've got enough to keep you up at night, Avery drops a cliffhanger.
And if you think understanding them is hard, wait till you hear about trying to catch one.
As Avery kept spinning his tale, the room was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. He talked about how these bad seeds could charm the skin off a snake, all while not feeling a thing when they did someone dirty. He wasn't just painting pictures with his words, he was dragging us into the deep end, showing us the ugly underbelly of the human psyche. But Avery didn't stop at just scaring the daylights out of everyone. He threw down a challenge, making it clear that if we're going to stand a chance against the real-life boogeymen, we've got to get into their heads.
If we're going to catch tomorrow's monsters,
he said,
we got to start by understanding the ones we've got today. Look past the charm, see the snake behind the smile. That's how we protect the ones who haven't been hurt yet.
He talked up a storm about profiling, not as some witch hunt, but as our best shot at stopping these guys before they start. He brought up all sorts of cases, the ones that make headlines and the ones that don't, showing how cracking the code of a psychopath's mind is key to putting them behind bars. And it wasn't all just gut feelings. Backed it up with science, talking about brain scans and childhood traumas and all that jazz.
We've got to link up the brainiacs with the badge carriers,
Avery declared.
Only then can we stay one step ahead of the darkness.
As he wrapped up, the storm outside seemed to take a breather, like it was listening in and decided to give us a break. But inside, Avery had kicked up a storm of his own, one that got everyone's gears turning, thinking about what they could do to shine a light in the dark corners he'd shown us. His talk wasn't just a bunch of facts, it was a call to arms, leaving everyone feeling like they had a part to play in keeping the boogeyman at bay. The applause at the end was thunderous, a sound as powerful as the storm that had just passed. It wasn't just clapping. It was a salute to a man who'd armed us with knowledge and courage. But just as the noise was dying down, a voice cut through the quiet. A young voice asking Avery if he thought evil was something born or made, something fixed or flexible. You could almost hear the room lean in, waiting for what Avery would say next. He looked out at us all, a sea of faces caught in the dance of the flickering lights.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
He said, and you could tell he was shifting gears, moving from lecturer to storyteller.
Is evil born or is it made? Let me tell you about a time when that question wasn't just theoretical for me. It was as real and as dangerous as it gets.
And just like that, he had us. Hook, line, and sinker. We were all on the edge of our seats, waiting to dive headfirst into whatever dark tale Avery had to share. A tale where he'd come face to face with evil itself, in a showdown that sounded like it was straight out of one of those crime thrillers.
I took them all the way back to square one, to when this whole mess with the mountain shadow started.
This guy wasn't just your run-of-the-mill crook. He was a puzzle wrapped in a mystery,
I told them.
He did things so awful they'd make your skin crawl, but he did them in a way that made you think. He was smart, real smart.
As I laid it all out for them, it was crystal clear we weren't chasing just any ordinary bad guy. This one was a nightmare come to life, a serial killer whose crimes were so cold and cruel, they'd make even the toughest of us feel a chill. He wasn't just taking people out. He was putting on a horror show, using the deep, dark woods of Alabama as his personal stage for terror.
What made this guy's crime stand out wasn't just the killing. It was how he turned it into some sick show for the whole world to see online. Imagine that, streaming in real time the pain and fear of his victims, as if their suffering was just another thing to watch on the internet. That twisted move made everything even more urgent for us. We were racing against time, trying to catch him before he could put on another one of his gruesome performances. The places he picked for these horrors were just as thought out and wicked. One time, he left folks covered in raw meat and chained up for a starving black bear to find. Another time, he tied victims up over a nest of fire ants, all cut up so they'd be alive long enough to feel every single bite. It wasn't enough for him to just end their lives. He wanted to make them suffer, turning nature itself into a weapon. The way he did things, it was clear this wasn't your average killer. He had a plan, a sick kind of signature that showed he wasn't just about the kill. He was about making a spectacle of it, using the wild Alabama mountains as his partners in crime. Realizing what we were up against flipped the whole investigation on its head. This guy took joy in the show of it all, making the great outdoors his accomplice. Piecing together the clues of his twisted acts, we knew we were up against something else entirely. This killer wasn't just a murderer. He was a master of horror, using the beauty of nature as the backdrop for his nightmares. That moment of realization changed everything for us, pushing us harder to stop him before he could take another life in his twisted game. Then, out of nowhere, we got a break, or at least, that's what it felt like at the time. The mountain shadow sent us a clue that led us straight to what we were praying we wouldn't find. The tension was thick, the fear real. And there, under the cold, dark earth, we found her, a girl, barely hanging on. It was a wake-up call showing us just how twisted this guy really was.
The room was dead silent, hanging on my every word as I told them about the rescue, about the mixed-up feelings of horror and hope.
Saving that girl made us all take a hard look in the mirror. It made us wonder about the line between good and evil, and if crossing it was as easy as stepping over a shadow.
Negotiating for her life, trying to understand why the mountain shadow did what he did, it was like dancing with the devil.
We were walking a tightrope over an abyss, trying to save a life without losing our own souls in the process.
By the time I wrapped up the story, you could have heard a pin drop. This wasn't just a case file anymore. It was a deep dive into what makes us tick and what ticks us off.
Evil's not black and white,
I said as I finished.
It's about the choices we make, and sometimes understanding the bad guys helps us do our jobs better.
That lecture hall turned into something else that night, a place where we all got a little closer to understanding the darker side of humanity, and maybe just a bit about ourselves, too.
After I spilled the beans on the lecture and Q&A, it hit me hard. No amount of talking could truly show the weight of it all. The gut-wrenching feelings, the sleepless nights wondering if we'd ever catch this shadow lurking in the darkness. I remember when the chase kicked off as if it were yesterday, when we stumbled upon something wicked online. A place where this fiend, calling himself Mr. MS, broadcasted his sick game. Among the many things he did was also to bury folks alive, streaming it for a twisted audience on the dark web. It was like something out of a horror movie, but real, and it chilled us to the bone. Our cyber sleuths were on it, digging through the digital muck, chasing ghosts behind screens. It was a maze, a game of cat and mouse with stakes higher than any of us wanted to admit. And then, boom, we had a break. A slip-up led us straight to Mr. MS, a guy named Daniel Kretschmer, a shrink-turned-psycho. The guy was like a dark mirror, showing me bits of myself twisted in his madness. His charm, his smarts, used not to heal but to harm. The day we moved in on Kretschmer, everything was on the line. We found him holed up in a cabin so ordinary it was eerie, surrounded by the quiet woods. Inside, the horror show was laid bare, screens showing his last victim, a girl fighting for every breath beneath the earth. I was boiling, every part of me screaming for poetic justice. When we nabbed Kretschmer, it was too easy. He gave up like he'd been waiting for us, a calm in his eyes that made my skin crawl. No fight, no fury, just surrender. It was unsettling, seeing how far gone he was, how far apart we stood despite the surface similarities. In the cold and bleak interrogation room, it was like playing chess with the devil. Kretschmer was slick, twisting words, trying to justify his nightmare as some sort of sick experiment. Every answer he gave was a test, a push against my own sense of right and wrong. Meanwhile, our team was racing against the clock to save the girl, digging through dirt with hope as our only guide. When we got the call she was safe, it was a moment of light in the deepest darkness, a win that felt too rare. Dealing with Kretschmer, trading the girl's location for his life, it was a murky deal. Saving her was a no-brainer, but it left a bitter taste, wondering if we'd played right into his hands. Looking back at the Mountain Shadow case, it's clear. It's our choices that define us, not our skills or smarts. Kretschmer chose the dark. I chose to stand against it, to use whatever I had to bring a bit of light back. The weight of that case, it's something we all carried back into our everyday lives. The faces of those he hurt, the lives he twisted. They're reminders of the cost of this fight, but also of the strength people have to survive, to heal. In the end, this was more than just catching a bad guy. It was a dive into the abyss, a test of our will, and a lesson in the human spirit's power. It shaped how I see the world, how I understand justice and evil, and the resilience we all have inside to face down the darkness. As the echoes of my words faded, I watched the room snap back from the past to here and now. Those young faces, all fired up with questions and a hunger to know more, reminded me why I do this. Wrapping up, I dropped one more piece of wisdom, hoping it'd stick with them.
Remember, folks, it's about who we're fighting for, the victims, their families, and those who haven't been touched by darkness. Yet, keep the light shining, even on the darkest nights.
I reminded them.
We're not just born this way or that. It's the roads we take, the choices we make. Understanding that is key to stopping these cycles before they spin out of control.
After the lecture, a handful of students hung back, diving deeper into the gritty details and moral mazes of law enforcement and psychology. Each question they threw at me opened up new lines of thought, pushing us all to think harder about the tough stuff, the nature of evil, how to keep our humanity intact in the face of horror, and what justice really means. As the crowd thinned to just a few, I laid on them one last thought, heavy enough to carry with them.
In the fight against darkness, don't lose your own light. Evil's got a way of eating up everything around it, but that's only if we let it. Justice? It's more than just locking up the bad guys. It's about understanding, healing, and stopping the next wave of shadows before they roll in.
The room went quiet, everyone wrapped up in their thoughts. I hoped what I said would stick with them, make them think twice about the world and their place in it. As they finally left, a few pausing to throw me a thanks or a nod, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I'd made a dent. This wasn't just about spilling facts or scaring them straight. It was about lighting a spark, getting them ready to take on the world's monsters, both in the streets and inside us. Back in my office, the storm outside seemed like a distant memory. My little corner of Quantico was crammed with books, case files, and those little reminders of the battles we'd fought. Each one told a story, a lesson learned the hard way. Sitting there, I couldn't help but think about the double-edged sword I carried, bringing bad guys to justice while guiding the next generation. It was a tough gig, filled with sleepless nights and moral quandaries. But in those quiet moments, I knew it was worth it. Tonight's lecture, like so many before it, wasn't just a recap of cases closed. It was a chapter in a larger story, one I was still writing, about understanding the darkness so we could all live in the light. It was about leaving something behind, not medals or trophies, but a flame of knowledge and courage in those coming up after me. As I got my stuff ready for the next day, I felt that old familiar fire. This fight, this quest for understanding and justice, wasn't mine alone to wage. It was ours, a shared journey into what it means to be truly human. Stepping out of my office, I felt lighter, ready to face whatever comes next. Because in the end, the most important legacy any of us can leave is the light we've passed on, guiding the way forward in the endless battle for a world where the shadows are just a little bit less dark.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Quantum Dispatches and stay tuned next week for another thrilling adventure. Thank you for listening.